All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. We've got 122 people on the call today, and so welcome. I'm Cliff Smart, Missouri State University president, and this is the first of three forums that will address the themes that we'll be focusing on in our next long-range plan, and so. The title of the presentation this morning is Addressing Campus Climate Flashpoints, and then that will feed into the campus climate and diversity focus within the long-range plan. Our facilitator this morning is EAB consultant, who is Angela Street, who is a director of In Research Advisory Services. Her focus area is academic strategy and student success, and within that, a sub-point focus is on campus climate, which is obviously essential for student success. And so, Angela, welcome to Missouri State, and thanks for leading our conversation this morning. And so with that, I'll turn it over to you. I will remind our folks that this is being recorded and will be posted on the Long Range Plan website, and so if you all want to watch it again or encourage others to watch it again, it will be available certainly by early next week. Angela, take it away.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, good morning to everyone. 10 o'clock your time and 11 a.m. mine. I am on the call with you today from Laurel, Maryland. EAB, our firm, is located and headquartered in Washington, D.C., so I live about 18 miles out. So thank you so much to President Smart for the wonderful introduction that I received this morning. And as he mentioned, our topic today is addressing campus climate flashpoints. So we'll really discuss, especially during this particular time period that we're facing so many multiple pandemics. So of course, students' response to how the challenges of COVID-19 and how we as a university are responding to that, in addition to the activism that is just occurring nationwide and even globally. And how are we responding? How are we preparing? How are we mitigating our risks and thinking about even our reputational risk and how we're responding to flashpoints? So today we'll define what EAB defines flashpoints as, that you'll be very familiar with, and then we'll think about the 5 failure paths that common for colleges and universities. So just very briefly about EAB, for those of you who may not know who we are and what we do. We are an education, research, and technology firm with focus on enrollment success, student success, and overall institutional success. And we partner with over 1,500 institutions and really help schools support students from enrollment to graduation and beyond with our research, best practices, and recommendations. And 95% of our partners continue with us year after year because our outcomes have just driven great value to institutions. Now, I'm sure I don't need to explain to you all the Zoom features because we are all Zoom experts by this particular point. But before we begin, and I'm sure all of you are, as I hear no feedback, to just be sure to mute yourself during the presentation today, unless, of course, there's opportunity for you to speak and, of course, engage in our conversation today. So all of that being in the left-hand corner of the black bar screen there. The chat feature seems to be, or question and answer area seems to be available as well. So feel free to share with your campus community if there are certain things that you want to share with one another during this particular time period. For those of you who may be active participants as well, if there is no influx of questions at any particular time, just feel free to unmute yourself without the need to be called upon. So just briefly, again, my name's Angela Street. I've worked in higher education for almost 15 years at various public and private institutions with focus, as President Smart said, in student success, retention, and instructional design and development. And at EAB, I work directly with our partners by delivering our research and institutional best practices to really help you to discover new ways to approach your decision-making, your preparedness and planning, and identify strategies for overall institutional and, of course, student success. So we'll start here with our presentation, and we're all probably familiar with the idea of a campus flashpoint. So today, colleges and universities really face a wide range of flashpoints. So for example, there are flashpoints when an institution does something that triggers a strong reaction. So some flashpoints are caused by independent comments or behaviors by faculty, staff, or students. And then there are also flashpoints driven by the actions of, let's say, third-party groups or stakeholders not directly affiliated with the institution. So here we often think about controversial speakers or events as a good example. So across all of these examples, we set out to define a flashpoint for our work for today's presentation. We're defining flashpoints as a climate-related incident or event that causes disturbance in the community or media, including heightened levels of activism, media and public scrutiny, and especially reputational damage. So in one form or another, flashpoints have been a part of higher education for years now. So this isn't something necessarily new, of course. But since the early, or let's say mid-2010s, flashpoints have been year after year in the headlines. But in 2015, as you all are very familiar, it felt like everything shifted. So the events in Ferguson, Missouri ignited students as activists. And this led to this national wave of demands with students asking for everything from more diverse faculty to more robust support services and even new leadership on their campuses. So in the last few years, we've seen more and more activism on campus and more attention to bias incidents and just overall climate on campus in general. And most recently, we've seen national movements come to higher education, like the Me Too movement, debates about the limits of free speech. Those are just all commonplace for most colleges and universities. So just for a moment, let's reflect on where we were 4 years ago. So President Trump had just won the presidential election, and we were caught off guard. And colleges and universities were caught off guard by this unrest and upheaval that followed President Trump's win. And campuses who failed to quickly and adequately address the issues found themselves even broadening the incident's impact. So mirroring what is happening nationally, colleges and universities have found themselves also facing a rise in bias incidents and violence on the part of extremists. So are we prepared for 2020 is really the central question. And how much time have we dedicated over the past few months for preparing for the presidential election? So when it comes to flashpoint management, the big question is, well, what will ignite? And as the vice provost for student life at Crichton says, it's hard to read the tea leaves to determine when an incident on campus is going to catch the attention of the media. So this uncertainty means that institutions are constantly maneuvering to address new flashpoints, which makes it difficult to stay focused. So take this quote, if we want to look on the right-hand side here, from Rebecca Blank, who's the chancellor at University of Wisconsin-Madison. And she said that during the 4 years I've been in this job, at this particular time when she shared this, at least 3 of those have felt like a constant state of crisis. So she's still trying to figure out how to keep herself and the staff focused on long-term strategic changes that need to be made while also dealing with the constant weekly crisis. Now take a look here. although it may be very daunting to take a look at, but if you can just kind of scan your eyes over this particular tumultuous year and this timeline before you. So now we're facing two pandemics simultaneously. So one with a threat to our health and one with the violence and civil unrest facing our country. So I want you to think about just how much the world has changed since January. And now, in a few short weeks, another election result that can cause another wave of protests and violence, regardless of the outcome. So here you can see from January to now the overview of this tumultuous year. So what I've heard in having these conversations with partners who may not have had a lot of civil unrest or a lot of protests for injustice, what I remind them and ensure that I tell them is, you've never had this freshman class before. So you're not exactly sure who's coming into your institution that may not have been there before. And issues are heightening. So there's more than one issue going on simultaneous like right now that people across America are becoming fed up with. And so because there has been maybe a low to moderate level of activism or protest going on your campus does not mean that that will be sustainable going forward, as to why this research and information is so important, especially right now. So 2020, it's not 2016. So it's become worse for us. So there's so much scrutiny and criticism in every corner of our institutions, from our faculty, staff, students, our external stakeholders, that everything sometimes feels political or controversial. And we may think because our courses are mostly remote that we're less likely to experience the same levels of student activism. But remember that people often behave worse online and get what I like to call keyboard courage. So social media could actually be what sparks a flashpoint. So as you can see here, there are different ways that students, of course, can be showing their activism in different ways, and especially through social media as well. It can happen in that space. So just for a moment, for those of you who are active participants today, and feel free to unmute yourself as needed. And thinking back to this spring, at the start of COVID, what issues were causing the most unrest from students on how your institution may have been handling their needs and challenges of going rapidly remote? So maybe refunds, moving out of housing, flexibility in courses. What was most concerning for students then, and maybe even now? Rebecca, did I see you unmute yourself? Yes.
Yes, good morning. Access and technology.
Okay, access and technology. Okay, are there others? Others want to share from your respective departments what students were most concerned about or most vocal about on your campus? And it doesn't have to be that it was something that you internally weren't doing well, but what were students most challenged with or most maybe disgruntled about? Any other things? Well, for a lot of institutions, it was just fear about refunds and what that was going to look like as far as residential life was concerned. A lot of disgruntled students in regards to flexibility in courses, not wanting the scale of pass-fail and other things associated with that. And so those things seem to be light, but certainly across the country, students certainly have been activating in regards to responding to COVID-19 responses and how their institutions have been responding. So colleges and universities are not alone in experiencing flashpoints, and many of these same issues are happening in the private sector. And now students, alumni, and other stakeholders are comparing the responses from their institutions with those of companies who've responded to their incidents backlash, which now raises the bar for what constitutes an adequate response. And businesses and organizations sometimes just have more flexibility when responding to flashpoints, but colleges and universities can follow suit. So here are two examples that certainly will be familiar to you of emerging gold star standards on how colleges and universities should look to respond. So when Starbucks experienced a bias incident on the part of one of their employees in 2018, they quickly issued this thorough response and addressed the broader context with racial bias training. We'll talk about that in just a moment. And they required all of their employees to participate. And then this summer, if you remember, when Ben and Jerry's issued their statement after the George Floyd murder, they not only expressed their anger and outrage, but what set them apart is they also addressed the historical context of these issues. So educating beyond their employees and inserted themselves as a part of the movement as well. So institutions are falling behind. For example, in responding to George Floyd's murder, many colleges and universities, they also issued these statements. But the statements were criticized for being too general, being empty, and lacking actionable agendas. So institutions are frequently caught by surprise when flashpoints arise and vulnerabilities are shown through outdated policies and no defined strategy for response. So according to the AACU, 85% of four-year university leaders believe racial injustice protests are likely this fall, which suggests the need for a formalized strategy and action plans. It's coming. And flashpoints can have lasting impacts with reverberating repercussions that lasting impacts your reputational damage. So if we think about, if we can kind of remember in the news from 2011, UC Davis's infamous pepper spray incident, that happened in 2011 and it's still being referenced in the media in 2020. So there are real consequences for failing to respond rapidly and really strategically. So we see impacts in institutions on their fundraising, their enrollment, legal action occurring, and ultimately putting jobs, budgets, and of course, reputation at risk. So when we look at consumer research about millennials and Gen Z today, it's clear that these students see themselves as driven by a social purpose. They're choosing their colleges and universities based on what your values are and the mission of your institution. And if you think about from a private perspective, even 1 in 2 customers will pay more for a product or brand known for its social value or community commitment. You see here, 72% of Gen Zers want to see their employers supporting racial equality, and 39% of millennials feel that businesses' top priority should be to improve society. So these expectations certainly carry over to how institutions manage flashpoints on campus. Institutions are really expected now to go beyond traditional boundaries to address these issues, and especially from your students. So a little deeper through our research, we found that incidents generally fell into one of, let's say, 7 categories, with racial justice unsurprisingly being the runway leader. And it's notable that we already see COVID-related activism take the #3 spot for top topics across the 5-year time span that we examined. So of the 500 plus incidents and demands we looked at, about half came from public and half came from private institutions. So the reason for my question earlier, and in response to what challenges your students were facing and what were they maybe most disgruntled about in response to COVID-19, is there is no timeline, as Dr. Fauci has continued to tell us, for this pandemic. And so leaning into a potential third semester of this is going to heighten the expectations of students and the necessity for our institutions to really step up in ensuring that we are responding effectively and impactfully to students' needs. This is going to continue to be an area of activism and focus for students right now. So let's discuss here for a moment, and I can certainly venture to the question and answer and or look for those who have raised their hands. And just thinking about how will we get this right? And I want you to think internally about what you know about the culture of your campus. I want you to think about what you know of your students. For those of you who were around in 2016, can think about what that time was like then. But as we've moved into a very different climate over the past 4 years, how do you anticipate the campus community will respond to the 2020 election and even its aftermath? I'm going to take a look. Feel free to also unmute yourself. If there's no influx, of course, of individuals, feel free to unmute yourself now. How do you anticipate your campus community will respond? And think about through social media, think about just in general, in person, what that will be like on your campus.
As a student myself,
Great,
I would say that I think it really could go either way. I think that if we see the current president win again, I think a lot of students will respond very harshly to that. And I think also being in a pretty conservative part of the state, I think some students will be fine with that result. However, I think if Biden takes the lead or something like that, I think we could see a lot of students pretty happy about it, to see a more progressive, I guess, thing happening. Again, I think that would be very appealing to a lot of students. So I think it could go either way, strictly based off the fact that we have I think it's probably pretty 50-50 if you ask me, based off just the students I know. But I think also geographically, I think obviously we are in a more conservative part. So I think that has to be considered as well.
Okay. Blake, I'm so glad that you're here today and can be a part of this. We don't typically get to see students who are a part of these conversations. So I am so excited that you're on the line today. So I encourage you to continue to participate in this conversation because your voice is central. And I also want to encourage you to be a part of the after conversations as we talk about how to prepare and respond to this. So I am more than excited that you're here today. This is great. Great. Any others in knowing your students, maybe those of you who work in student affairs and or in any role, any respective area, your thoughts on how your campus community will respond?
This is Suzanne. I think, a big challenge that I see for us is the uncertainty of the results of the election and how they're being challenged even now, and the disruption that could occur one way or another as a result of that at the time. Also with mail-in ballots, we may not have an immediate decision. So I think that there's just going to be a lot of angst, anxiety around Election Day, just because of all this buildup of uncertainty.
Certainly. And that's in response to either way, either outcome, one way or another. So absolutely. Absolutely. Others, thoughts about if you like as I said before, if you were around in 2016, as opposed to, kind of seeing a new class and new cohorts to come through, anything that may concern you or that you just anticipate from your campus community? You know, it's kind of, as Suzanne was saying, especially when there's, you know, mixed views, and there is just that uncertainty, and you may have not had as much unrest in the 2016 period, so you don't have as much of a blueprint of thought to really think about what things are going to look like, certainly. So you don't have a template of understanding, or a template of experience, I should say, of what the future and the present will look like. Well, we'll talk about that a little bit more. So,
you know, Angela, we had we have had at times faculty members express really you know, unhappiness, maybe said a different way depending on your perspective, kind of hateful comments about our current president that has created backlash from conservative parents or students. And so, you know, I think kind of depending on who wins the election and when the election is known, I think Blake's comment that our student body is more of a 50-50 break than maybe a lot of campuses see. I think there is the potential for those on the losing side, whichever side that is, to respond negatively to others perceived to be on the winning side.
yeah, sure, absolutely. Absolutely. I want to venture for just a moment into the question and answer area. Of course, we'll have an opportunity at the very end to answer these as well, but I don't want to negate what's present. So as we were talking about what we believed some of these concerns might be and challenges may be moving forward, one particular, one of your colleagues mentioned just the fear of the unknown. Not having solid, definite answers, certainly. Paula Moore shared of international students perceiving our community not taking COVID seriously and being fearful about leaving their apartments. So we needed to provide a lot more support around them to ease their anxieties. And so certainly learning from that, as I said before, I may sound like a broken record in repeating and quoting Dr. Fauci of, we just have no timeline for this. So we're going to be preparing for this potentially for another semester. So what lessons have we learned to carry over to maybe think about how we're going to respond to that again? Not being able to be face-to-face for laboratory practice. And so that being an issue and a challenge for students, absolutely. So I also see a statement here. I'm going to come back to that one in just a moment because I think there's an article associated with that if you all want to venture into the question and answer to read that. So campus protests, perhaps, that may be occurring. And then lastly here, recruitment of international students will become much more challenging, and there will need to be more support from the university as a whole if we're going to continue to include global engagement as a part of our long-range plan. So again, another comment about our international students and our preparedness for their safety, their success, and ensuring that they have the support that's needed. Great. So if we turn our attention here to this particular slide, as promised, we'll go through the 5 failure paths for colleges and universities. So through our conversations with senior leaders, we've identified these 5 failure paths that really hinder institutional responses across higher ed. So failure paths 1 and 2 focus on risk identification and preparation. Failure paths 3 and 4 address institutional response, really focusing on the teams and communication streams used for Flashpoint response. And failure path 5 addresses the broader context of Flashpoints, so providing recommendations on how to effect change beyond immediate incident response. So we talked about a little bit of that when we were referring to Starbucks and Ben & Jerry's just a little bit earlier. So today we'll review each failure path and provide these recommendations and examples on how institutions are overcoming these challenges. So we'll start with how status quo risk identification practices often overlook potential campus flashpoints. So we see that risk management is very much the new normal. And in 2017, 69% of surveyed institutions report discussing enterprise risk management at the full board level. And these discussions are happening more frequently, and with 1 in 4 institutions reporting discussing enterprise risk management at every board meeting. Also, significant increases in job postings related to risk title roles and the need for those with risk management skills and experiences. But back to this major point here, reputational risk is a continuing blind spot. And institutions consistently manage the all familiar tracking of financial, operational, and compliance risks. So we're all doing that. But campus flashpoints breeding reputational risk remain constantly overlooked. So risk management offices, they don't typically have the expertise needed to identify and monitor these risks. So as you can see here, the data shows that 3 of the 5 emerging reputational risks are related to flashpoints. So preparing for reputational risks requires you to proactively identify flashpoints. So we recommend regular updates to your risk register to include these. So which traditionally rich registers have this narrow content focus, and including flashpoints will help you to promote early risk mitigation. So EAB, we have a climate risk management white paper, and it's a climate risk compendium, and it includes a list of institutional risks to use to update your register, and really a suggested framework for institutional preparedness. This is available to you as our partner, and it's located on our website at eab.com. So the main goal here is, of course, updating your risk register and moving away from that narrow content focus and ensuring to integrate campus flashpoints as a part of that. So when we speak with administrators about monitoring risks and getting ahead of flashpoints, the first thing leaders mention is the continued challenge of social media. So we tend to be reactive, and monitoring occurs across departments. And many companies and higher ed institutions are now investing in these social listening systems and platforms which generate themes on specific topics and climate-related messaging. So it typically requires some type of investment in an enterprise-level software type platform. So we've also developed a toolkit to teach some of these concepts, as well as an audit for your social listening strategies and opportunities. And I will ask Paul, who's your strategic leader, to follow up with some of this information as well to ensure that you have this in your resource library from EAB. Let me give you an idea of how this works, as this is becoming extremely popular. So this is an illustration from Campus Sonar, a social listening agency for colleges and universities. So using this social listening system might have informed Duke University's response to their campus coffee shop incident, where one of their baristas was fired for playing a song believed to be inappropriate by the chief student affairs officers. So this ultimately resulted in an uproar from students, the song artists even themselves responding, and the coffee shop ultimately cutting ties with Duke. So the blue line, it may look somewhat black there, but it's a very dark blue line, represents the actual ebb and flow of the social conversation by its volume, its voice, and its sentiment, which are the three key crisis metrics they use to analyze it. So following the repeated use of a hashtag alone is a start to monitoring the direction of a climate incident. Now let's venture into the second failure path, which is concerned with decentralizing intelligence about what is actually happening on campus. So most risk elevation efforts end up depending on the right person knowing the right thing at the right time. And with information decentralized, actionable information gets lost with an inability to really mobilize cross-institutional efforts in the way in which we should. So if you think about, if you look on the left-hand slide here, information technology may have some information that they've seen is trending on their through social media. Through the Student Center, several students are making a political statement and refusing to wear masks. And in athletics, an athlete just tested positive for COVID. So many times, some of these issues are siloed and not necessarily being shared across campus through a centralized way in order to ensure that we're mitigating risk and communicating effectively throughout our campus. So on this slide, we have 4 recommendations for collecting and coordinating information sharing. So the first is to monitor the pulse of campus using social listening. So Earlham College created a hashtag that they call Earlham Plus, and a social media dashboard across different platforms to monitor how the campus community is doing during COVID. So it's something that's active right now and continuously going. The second, creating mechanism to track events. So we see where Georgia Tech created this user-friendly website where students must register for events and the campus community can identify what events are happening. So you can mitigate in that way and identify who may be looking to organize a particular protest or is igniting something on your campus. And a third is designating a staff member, someone who has built trust with frontline staff and responsible for reporting to senior leaders about critical on-the-ground information. So many times, this is the dean of students who is the contact with frontline staff sharing these incidents and occurrences. And then lastly, the cabinet just regularly discussing potential risks, specifically to campus climate flashpoints. And we can expound on that in just a moment here. So we recommend creating channels where people can regularly discuss concerns and possible risks. So if you look at the University of Miami, they empower campus partners to proactively address flashpoints through their campus climate committee. So the purpose is to keep a pulse, and I know that this is one of the areas of focus as I was talking with Sean and Suzanne in regards to campus climate. So their committee is proactively addressing these issues, and that purpose is, like I said, to keep a pulse on climate and catch potential issues early before they escalate to a full-blown flashpoint. So their committee is composed of 30 members from a wide variety of student affairs departments, so including, let's say, student activities, dining, housing, and athletics as well. And it's chaired by their Vice President of Student Affairs or Chief Student Affairs Officer, which of course signals senior level buy-in. So the team meets at for 6 90-minute meetings per year, with dates set well in advance to minimize conflicts. And one of the things that is great about Miami's committee is the structure of the committee. So each meeting features a set agenda composing of 3 simple questions. So as you can see that being outlined there on the right. So how is my work or my current work and initiatives affecting the campus climate for students? Number 2 being, are there any issues that may disrupt the climate on campus? And then lastly, are there patterns of information that we all may need to address together? So the goal of this agenda is to encourage this honest dialogue about emerging areas of concern, and added benefit is that the standard agenda as means to that committee members don't have to prepare anything in advance. Any thoughts surrounding what has currently been developed? And Suzanne, if you certainly want to jump in here as to your thoughts and sharing with the group what ideas have come about in responding to campus climate and forming a committee for future initiatives.
So we don't have a committee per se identifying future initiatives, but I was kind of pleased to see the list that you identified earlier in terms of social media, working with the senior team, being able to get together quickly. We have put mechanisms in place and processes in place that allow us to respond pretty quickly when our social media team identifies subjects that might be rising to the level of concern on social media. And even before then, if we start seeing a little bit of a trend on at Missouri State, we address it very, very quickly. So we are prepared in that way, but I did actually write down, how is my current work or some of our initiatives, how might that influence? And I think that's something for all of us to think about. And that's the hard part, is there's so much going on campus.
Sure.
How do we keep track of that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Anyone else in regards to what's currently happening and what you would like to see happening, and sharing through this opportunity now in regards to coming together as far as creating a committee or responding to campus climate? Any other thoughts resonating right now?
Angela, this is Sean.
Hi,
We
Sean.
have several representatives from different diversity, anti-racism, and inclusivity councils. And so some of those individuals may want to talk about where they are. We have some who have been organized for a number of years, and there are several colleges who have organized those recently. And we also have some engagement across academic departments.
Great. Excellent. Any of those individuals on the line that may want to share today? I think he's given you an introduction. Things that have been formulated or ideas that have been formulated thus far. Any particular issues that you want to think about in the onset as to why now and why this is so necessary on your campus, other than the obvious?
Brad, go ahead.
I'm sorry if
right.
hands are being raised and I don't see them. Please forgive me. There are quite a few individuals on here. Thank you, Brad.
No, thanks, Angela. No, you have a lot.
Uh-oh. I don't think we can. There you go.
I thought I would just share a little bit from the international program side. We've started this fall an international care and advocacy team, and I think it fits with what we're talking about here, which really has 2 purposes. One, we always focus on providing a high level of service and support for international students and for their experience, but obviously in the last few months we've seen an increase in mental health and emotional wellness incidents, and also preparedness for bias response situations. So we created this team with really across international programs with the students, well, with our staff that works with students in various areas so that we can be a bit of an early warning system to get the support to those students. But I think it addresses this failure point number 2 in that we also link that back into our student services area overall from a university standpoint so that we can work closely with the counseling center, with the dean of students, and have, you know, advocacy for those students and information that flows to decision makers at the more strategic level of the university. So it's a relatively small scale model in the sense that we're dealing with the population of around 1,000 students now, but it's a model that could work in other parts of the university as well.
Absolutely. Perfect. Perfect. Any other thoughts as they've shared? Or an opportunity now to address how maybe your respective area would like to be a part of this conversation, or what might be necessary at this particular point to consider as a part of this work on your campus. Other thoughts? I think I heard. Go ahead, Rebecca.
We have a few things going on. The sense of belonging for diverse students on campus has been kind of a common thread over the last few years, and the university has made great strides to increase the college-going experience for diverse students. And I mean, we have recently developed a partnership with the Society of African American Brotherhood, and they're bringing some great opportunities for students in addition to scholarships and things for African American males. But we are also undergoing, currently a expansion of our Plaster Student Union, which will involve renovation of our Multicultural Student Center. And the folks that are working on that, along with the staff and students that are involved with the Office of Student Engagement, the folks working on that project are really heavily involving the students. And that is helping us send our message as a campus that, you know, we really are working hard to improve the climate for students and that everyone is having a good experience here as a student.
Perfect, perfect. I see a raised hand from Algerian Heart. You want to unmute yourself? Please feel free.
Yeah, Angela, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I think something that's important, I kind of want to go back a little bit in terms of the University of Miami example, because it's one of those where, you know, not just the president, but the board, you know, spoke very freely of the challenges that they were having. And I kind of want to, you know, put Missouri State in that same situation. Obviously, that's one of the reasons why we're having this conversation right now.
Sure.
Is that, you know, it's really a conversation truly about, you know, our lane. Where do we fit in that lane, and how do we address the needs of our students, particularly those that are, you know, engaged and really afraid. You know, there's a lot of vulnerability, and that's the true essence of this. When you talk about flashpoints, you can have a flashpoint, you know, amongst just groups trying to figure out how we're going to move in a positive direction to ultimately positively impact our students. And I go back to the data, you know, in terms of what the University of Miami put out, because it was really brought on and spurred by some really uncomfortable moments that were really started by students. And so in terms of where we are, that's not something that has happened here. And it's really important that we are proactive in getting out in front. I think that's part of addressing it, is that you're wanting to be proactive because this will go away in terms of COVID, but getting out ahead of what's going to happen from around the corner. You know, you're coming at 90 miles an hour in a zone that says 30, right? You know, and so in essence, what I believe is really important is, while we're evaluating the data, not forgetting, you know, who we are and who we serve. And I think that's one of the things that you don't want to say will pat us on the back, but ultimately what we're trying to do is get in these different spaces with these committees to address those needs for what we're trying to almost predict, if you will, if that makes sense. Because I was kind of going back to what you had said with Miami, and it seems that there are some pretty significant parallels to what we're doing. And prayerfully, you know, we can get out in front of some of these things.
Mhm. Absolutely, absolutely. And the flashpoint number one just being about, being aware, in order to be able to mitigate and kind of catching, as it says, the purpose of this committee is catching those potential issues early and really thinking about, you don't want to be reactive in something that, could really significantly impact the reputation of the institution. So if we are aware and going back to, and all of you will have a copy of this presentation if you don't already, of what those top concerns are right now, or the top protests and demands from students right now. And number three, once again, being COVID-19 response, and us not really knowing how long this is going to be present for us and what we should be anticipating in order to mitigate, and thinking about the present and the not so distant future. So great points in that, but I certainly wanted to really go into this particular slide as well, because I know, as Suzanne shared with me, that this is going to be a central focus, and one of the approaches to the committees that you are formalizing right now, and asking those questions of yourself, to really figure out your next steps and how your committee will be formed. Excellent. Great.
Angela,
Yes,
I
please.
think Julie Holmes had a question, or maybe it's
Okay.
changed, Julie.
Okay, and there are moments where I see raised hand and then moments when I don't. So please forgive me and continue to share with me, Suzanne. So thank you. Yes, please unmute yourself.
Thank you. I wanted to just let the group know that one of the ways we gather this intel is through our behavioral intervention team. On both campuses, we use that process to help identify both students of concerns and patterns of concerns. When you mentioned silos and information that doesn't flow easily from one group to another, our behavioral intervention team has been very effective in helping to track these issues, look for, as you said, patterns, and then to reach out to students, because our reporters come from all over, res life, faculty, staff, other students. So we're able to, in some ways, communicate effectively and resource the students and protect the university at the same time. So
certainly, absolutely, absolutely, yes. Thank you so much, Julia. Okay, great. Well, let me give you an example here, and just really thinking about what this looks like. This is an example here of a university where the communication team provides a briefing to cabinet leadership over a 6-week period to bring about or discuss emerging issues on campus, and top concerns are then monitored and prioritized. But these specifically being focused on potential flashpoints. Of course, there are briefings that continue that occur on a regular basis in our cabinet leadership meetings, but these are specific and focused on these particular issues. So every 6 weeks, the VP for communication briefs the president and talks about let's say the top 10 flashpoints or things that are occurring with students, thinking about the community as well, and just really about what's going on in society and what we should be thinking about that might be coming in the future that we need to monitor and that might be of concern. So this keeps risks top of mind, fostering early development of risk mitigation. So in this third failure path, we look at what happens when institutions assume that existing relationships are sufficient for managing responses. So we typically tend to see these two common approaches to incident response. So one being, if you look on the left-hand side, relationship-based. So I can pick up the phone and call who I need to respond to, which involves really no preparation, and this reliability may not remain consistent, especially in COVID. The second approach is using existing teams that don't necessarily have the scope, skill, or expertise required to respond to flashpoints. So if you think about it, our teams change our leadership shift, and our process and strategy intel and approach creates these disorganized responses. So we recommend institutions create a dedicated rapid response team specifically to respond to climate flashpoints. So the specific scope, the membership, the roles and responsibilities for your team will depend on your existing team. So you do have BIT that's currently in place, so it may be some of those individuals who are a part of that. So it'll depend on existing teams and task force and the skills of key campus leaders and departments. Our fourth failure path concerns determining if and when institutions should respond to a current or potential flashpoint. So while flashpoints themselves are variable and unexpected, there are several essential elements of effective responses. So in recognition of these common elements, most institutions race to gather info to inform their response each time a flashpoint erupts on campus. So similar incidents raise similar questions, such as, well, what did we say last time? And how do our peers respond to these incidents? Or what should we include about related resources? And should we get a comment from the president? So gathering this information is important to composing a response, but it also can be time consuming and of course, repetitive. So the central question for many college and university leaders is, should we respond? Okay, and this is really difficult because sometimes presidents find themselves having to make judgment calls all the time, and then they're judged for the quality in their responses. So if we look towards the data here, 55% of presidents reported speaking out more on political issues in 2017 than they typically do. And then 54% of presidents said that they intend to speak out more about these issues beyond those directly affecting their college. So the expectation, to respond is certainly heightened, and presidents are feeling the burn or feeling the necessity that this is a part of their role now, one way or another, but it's really deciding what we should respond to, what this looks like. And I'll show you a framework in just a moment of how the University of Maine system has worked that out or begun to think about it. So here it is here, the University of Maine system clarified when institutional leaders should comment on flashpoints. So they developed this stoplight framework, as you can see, and what it looks like here, to really simplify the decision-making for response, which consists of, just like a stoplight, green, yellow, and red zones. And each of them are broken down in these categories. So as you can see, green including mission critical issues that directly impact the institution, such as finances, student and employee health and safety, of course, which a president or chancellor can freely issue a statement in these. And then the yellow zone is for issues that don't directly impact the institution, such as immigrant policy and labor standards. But leaders should consult maybe a group of system leaders or those who are able to quickly consult on what if, or if anything, should be stated at all. And then lastly here, the red zone refers to issues unrelated to the university's mission or financial stability, such as state and federal policies. So these in particular don't necessarily require a response. But keep in mind, what may be green for you may be yellow for the University of Maine. and or for another institution. So what might be mission indirect might be mission critical for you. So, of course, this framework is certainly a template for you to use to think about and using it and applying it at your institution. But of course, maybe potentially changing its categories, and maybe those particular issues might be different for your green zone versus what might be for the university system. This, of course, is updated, not necessarily frequently, but certainly as a part of a campus climate committee and or a task force that's responsible for thinking about flashpoints and looking at this every year or so or a couple times within that to ensure that what's mission critical for us now is still mission critical for us, or what might have been indirect might now be mission critical. Any questions regarding this framework or how this could be used at your institution, or is it in alignment with maybe of how you respond to flashpoints? And you may not be aware of if there's a formalized system. Any thoughts here? And once again, there may not be a system as comprehensive or formalized as this. I think I heard someone unmute themselves.
Yeah, this is President Smart. Yeah, you know, we probably do need to formalize it better, but I would tell you the thing that drives me most specifically in whether the university or I personally am going to make a statement on the issue is whether it directly impacts our institution.
Sure.
I mean, that's the first thing we look at every single time. And so if we go back to the George Floyd death, that did not directly impact our institution until we had a couple of students mimicking and making fun of his death. Well, then now it has directly impacted the institution, and we have to respond to that.
Certainly.
And so, whereas before, I think it indirectly, impacted lots of people who were horrified or outraged, but it wasn't a direct connection to the university until kind of the event, the social media follow-up events that happened.
Certainly.
Now, some people would criticize that. I think it was not, that category is not, or that decision point is not universally accepted, I think, all across, all of our constituent groups. But I would say that's been the driver for me. Does something directly impact the university?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So something can begin, as you stated, President Smart, in the yellow zone and then advance to the green zone because of what can come out of it. So certainly. And so what's listed within this framework doesn't have to be as granular as a specific example such as that, but there certainly is movement within response and what that looks like. And you do certainly have to kind of delve into the specifics of what those particular challenges are and knowing how to respond and when to respond, because they certainly, one thing could ignite something else. It could start off something very low level and certainly change and abrupt into something much more serious. So absolutely. Any other thoughts? I'm looking for hands. I may not be looking. There we go. Wonderful. Wonderful. All right, great. So this brings us to our fifth and final failure path, because I do want to leave the last portion here of our time together to ask questions. So please begin to add your questions to the question and answer a portion that you have available to you on the black bar. We will create an opportunity for those of you who don't have the option to unmute yourself. Please enter your questions there so that we can collectively have this conversation together. And then, of course, our active participants, if there's no influx of questions, just be free to unmute yourself. But we'll go into our final failure path here. So too often, colleges and universities respond to the, and let me go back here for just a moment. The final failure path, of course, being institutions addressing the immediate Flashpoint incident, but not the broader context. Remember, I said that we would come back to and thinking about how Starbucks and how Ben & Jerry's did not only just respond to the issue, but they ensured with Starbucks that their particular employees received that diversity training, in addition to Ben & Jerry's and how they responded and made sure that they were a part of the movement in regards to Black Lives Matter, and became certainly a part of those challenges. So responding to the immediate issue is not necessarily a challenge for students, but of course failing to address that broader context on campus. So students increasingly are expecting more comprehensive responses to flashpoints on campus that really address their deeper concerns. So the flashpoint happens, as you can see here on the left. We respond, we release a statement, we might organize groups, talk to students about it, but there's little time for ongoing follow-up. As busy staff, they just move on sometimes to the next flashpoint, or there's no larger community engagement initiatives that occur in response to that. So beyond a community change, Emory University, as example here, seeks to drive long-term reform at an institutional level. And in 2015, Emory developed a commission structure to address students' demands and their underlying concerns. So like many campuses, Emory received a list of demands in fall 2015 related to equity on campus. And looking at these demands, Emory realized they need to do more to address the underlying issues and broader context really at play. So they developed their Commission on Racial and Social Justice to address student demands. And the commission relies on a flexible group of what they call SJPOs, so social justice process owners, to address each of these issues. Faculty and staff are selected as these SJPOs based on their expertise and authority, and each SJPO leads a fluid working group of students, faculty, and staff to address a specific issue. These individuals, they periodically report back to the full commission, executive committee on progress, and proposed, of course, next steps. So this is effective because it involves many stakeholders. It increases senior level support, is specifically focused on concrete actions to address underlying concerns, and of course, increases accountability. So Emory's vision was to create a structure where the institution could do more to address student concerns. I said before that we would get back to this information here regarding opportunities for accountability. So institutions are using varied approaches to address the broader context. So look at the top left here. Colgate University's response to the George Floyd murder, for example. So the president wrote an open letter to campus that spoke to the university's commitment to diversity, but also condemned racial justice happening across America. And on the right, Tufts University College of Civic Life built out a step-by-step guide on how to facilitate political discussions with resources that can be used to have these difficult conversations. In the bottom left quadrant here, Cornell University developed an online tracking system where the status of all of their institutional initiatives are listed, and progress is updated or uploaded directly to their website and open access for anyone to view. I highly encourage you to go to their website and take a look at that. They have a list of everything that they have promised through their task force and their committees that they're going to be working on, and then a timeline, and then they show you their action items and how they've progressed on them with certain dates that are marked and stamped there. So it's open access to anyone because it's right there on their website, and it causes, of course, accountability to their students and, of course, the campus community as a whole. And what's most interesting for me this past June, if you look on the bottom right here, George Washington University's Board of Trustees approved this new initiative to begin accepting proposals for new names for campus buildings and memorials. So submissions and requests are tracked publicly and reviewed by the cabinet and trustees for consideration. So those controversial names that buildings that were named after maybe controversial individuals in United States history are being considered, being changed, and the names of those particular buildings and suggestions are submitted and taken into consideration for future naming by their Board of Trustees. So now, as we think about this overview today, so we've covered the 5 most important or the 5 most common failure paths. So we'll review each one that we've gone over today by its focus. So failure path number 1, overlooking potential campus flashpoints. So we have our status quo risk identification practices in place, but we don't have focus necessarily on campus flashpoints. Number 2 was information about potential flashpoints being siloed and maybe being decentralized. So we miss opportunities to intervene. Number 3, we talked about leadership teams assuming that existing relationships are sufficient for managing the institutional response strategy. Remember, our teams change, the reliability and that strength of those relationships changes over time, and we can't rely on that being our mechanism for responding with those individuals in place. Failure 4, institutions are unsure if, when, and who should respond. So we talked about that framework and thinking about when we should respond and who should respond to those particular incidents. And then last but not least, addressing the immediate flashpoint incident, but then not the broader context on campus. And so that, of course, is what our community will be expecting from us, and especially from our students as a whole. So I invite you now to, of course, those who are active participants today to unmute yourself if you would like to speak, of course, and I will be looking for raised hands, whether that be literally or through the raise hand feature that's provided for us through Zoom. And I've put before you the failure paths here. And once again, overlooking potential campus flashpoints, and so on. So I want to give you about a couple of seconds here, and I want you to think about which particular failure path is most concerning for you in regards to the Missouri State right now. How should we be responding? Where are our vulnerabilities? And where should we maybe put our focus first? So I'll give you about 10 seconds here. It is 14 after the hour, so at 12:50, or well, I guess it's 11:15 your time. Or I think we have someone who's unmuted, so we'll go ahead and start. Is that you, President Smart?
Yeah, I hate to speak first. Let's have some other people speak first, and then I'll share some thoughts as well.
Okay. This will kind of give you a little brain break. So 15 after?
Sometimes I inhibit conversation, and I don't want to do that. I would rather have other people's ideas than share my own. So I would encourage people to weigh in on this. This is the big discussion topic.
Yes, 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 yes. So let's sip our water for just a moment. Give yourself a little brain break. We'll give you about 10 seconds here.
Okay, Frank has a question.
Wonderful. Thank you. Go ahead, Frank. And I think
It's a question, but perhaps a comment too. I think the biggest challenge, and it is threaded through all of these for us, is there are some flashpoints that have a very direct, actionable thing you can do besides a verbal response. For example, when we entered the COVID crisis, went online, we had considerable stress from students who didn't have access to the ways to stay up in their class. So we could solicit funding and had donors and help get hotspots for students to have internet access and so on. But the harder part for, I think, most of us is how do we address the flashpoints that involve changing the mental, changing the heart, changing the minds so that, you know, we don't have that same type of incidents occur again.
Sure.
Of hate speech or you name it. And yes, we can have a verbal response, but where is the level of actionable things, you know, we try and we succeed in some cases and obviously don't in other cases.
Sure, certainly. Great points, great points. Jason, I believe you have unmuted yourself as well.
Yeah, hopefully you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you just fine.
Okay, good. I would say that from my perspective, we struggle as a campus on failure path number 4, unsure if, when, and who should respond. There's always a central response from the institution to these green light types of issues and events. But I think colleges and departments also feel an obligation and are sometimes pressured to issue some type of a response. So for me, both as a department head and also as an associate dean who's coordinating a college level diversity council, it can be kind of tricky to figure out, okay, do I wait for the institution to respond? Is this a green light or a yellow light? Faculty want me to respond. What's appropriate? How to best coordinate so that if, when, and who has been an issue, I think, on this campus.
Certainly, certainly, certainly. And I think there's one more person that just unmuted, Aja. And if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly, please correct me.
It is Aja. Thank you very much. So I think that something that we can always do a better job of is the communication piece. So I'm looking at, you know, failure 2. And I just think that there are times when we have, you know, information in certain areas that we, for some reason or another, do not get to the folks who can probably make, you know, the decisions and, you know, have those conversations. And so I think that's an area for improvement, as well as failure 5 too. Just from speaking with students, you know, addressing the immediate concern, you know, whether we put out a tweet that is questionable or something on social media, you know, we're quick to kind of try to fix that. But then, you know, when we think about, okay, looking at the broader context, if we continue to see a pattern, how do we begin to actually fix that instead of just, you know, those little things here and there, we can kind of, oops, we did this, but how are we actually addressing the broader issue and concern?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that's a particular area that many of our partners, Aja, as you mentioned, struggle with the most. I shouldn't say the most because I don't think that there is one area, you know, that's more dominant than the other, but we haven't done the best job about addressing that broader context. And what is the historical foundation in educating our students, our faculty and staff, and the why behind this is continuing to occur. I think what continues to be a pressing issue and has since the 60s and 70s is African-American student organizations, for example, have continued to ask for more funding, for more diversity in faculty and staff, and that has been an issue for the 30, 40 years. So the broader context maybe is not being addressed widely, and this isn't in reference to Missouri State, just in general in higher education, of why that's continuing to occur, and what are the actionable items that are occurring to diversify your faculty. But how do students find out about that? Are you sharing what your practices are as to what you're doing about the things that might be causing protests and that might be causing challenges on your campus? So wonderful. Others, before I get to President Smart, are there others?
Yeah, Angela?
Yes, hi.
Yeah, so we've been talking this whole time about more of a university-wide responses to these flashpoints, which is obviously well warranted and worthy of a lot of discussion. But would you mind commenting on how faculty and staff who have those direct relationships with students might feel empowered or able to open up those conversations with students with particular flashpoints, if you might have that?
Certainly. I think it is occurring in the classroom, and it's occurring in the classroom very siloed in a way that it's not being reported out. I think that these positive conversations about these difficult conversations are actually occurring in the academic space. But one thing that we always encourage is for our faculty members to consider the opportunity to advise student organizations. Sometimes that is left to the responsibility of those who work in student life or those who work in retention or some more of our student support services jobs and staff roles and responsibilities. So we encourage that because we found that when faculty involve themselves in student life in those ways that they can use their expertise, it's certainly been beneficial to be a part of helping students to develop those leadership skills that they need and be informed by someone who might be a history professor, who might be a political science professor. How can you help them to formalize these things that you're teaching them in their class? So combining getting your faculty involved in student life as best as possible as it relates to flashpoints is always very helpful.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Excellent.
As a quick follow-up with those comments, do you find there's an opportunity or a role for those faculty who are addressing those flashpoints, racism in medicine or through history and political science and sociology, like you've mentioned, to coordinate what they're doing in the classroom with these centralized responses from the university?
There is opportunity, I think, through these particular task force and these committees and playing a role and having the opportunity, with support of their dean and their particular academic departments, is getting involved with what is always occurring in student affairs. So this type of work is siloed in those particular areas. So I really think, and we talked about this in higher education and when I was in grad school, even 15 years ago, about aligning the work of academic affairs and student affairs. So that's continuously been a continued conversation in research, and this necessity that we know is, or what's necessary right now for our students to be successful. So I think it's about that partnership of academic affairs and student affairs, and really even educating the faculty about their opportunities that do exist in the way that student affairs professionals create these town halls and these forums and things of that nature. We don't have to keep our focus in the classroom. There are other opportunities to ensure that this information is shared. So absolutely. Mm-hmm. President Smart.
I think I really appreciate Jason and Dr. Huff. I mean, your thoughts on how we better connect so that individuals and departments can follow up and continue messages that are consistent with a university message are really helpful. And so I think there's work to be done there. But by and large, I think we've developed kind of a good practice on managing flashpoints over the last 5 years. And that our biggest challenge is number 5, and hence the how why I think this presentation is helpful as we begin thinking about our next long-range plan and how do we really move forward in the broader context of, as Frank said earlier, changing our culture so that we have to manage fewer flashpoints, right? And that's not the reason we're changing our culture, but that would be a result of that. And so I think there's some short-term work that we can do to formalize some of our practices and to connect subunits within the university to those responses. But I think the biggest question that we'll really want input on university-wide is that broader context issue that is number 5. And I think that's why people have begun to criticize university statements that they think are general and are not really changing the game. That there has to be action. And while we're working on lots of things, we don't, and we try to publicize widely things that we're working on. I think there's the potential to better, more strategically and regularly focus on success as well. And so I would really put a big circle around number 5, particularly as we roll into working on the long-range plan. And happy for others to respond to that, to add on, to push back, to give other thoughts on that as well. But that was kind of my reaction to hearing the 5 potential failure modes.
Great. So we just have a couple minutes here, but I don't want to negate what I do see in the question and answer here. So someone posted, and we don't necessarily have to answer this in this moment, but just in being aware that this question is something that one of your colleagues is wanting answered. Is there somewhere currently that we can go to see the university's position on certain flashpoints so that we feel equipped to speak to students about them correctly? So if we have an answer to that, feel free to unmute yourself, but just knowing that that's something that one of your colleagues is wanting answered, of where we can go to find the university's position on certain flashpoints so we know how to respond. And then one of your colleagues stated, I'm most concerned about failure path 5, kind of in conjunction to what President Smart was stating. Managing structural inequities, inequalities is different from changing the structures that produce them. Absolutely. Great. And one last comment here, going off of what Paula Moore wrote above, linking internalization efforts to diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives would increase awareness and thereby spur students and staff confidence in the university that is actively and intelligently working toward both flashpoint and environmental, so broader campus institutional goals. So that is internal communication, micro and macro, could be mapped out more distinctly. Great. So we are nearing the end of our time here. It was certainly a pleasure to engage with each of you who are here with us today. Please, I believe that Suzanne has shared a copy of this with you. If not, she certainly has a copy of it to share with you as well. And I want you to use it, of course, as a guiding document to further conversation. So it was a pleasure. There will be a survey that will be sent to you after this particular session. So we invite you to fill out that evaluation about your experience today. If you have any additional questions, Paul, do you want to quickly introduce yourself as the strategic leader? Uh-oh, you're still muted.
Sorry about that. Paul
That's
Gunther,
okay.
I lead Missouri State's research partnership with EAB. And so if there are follow-up material that can be helpful, beyond the presentation, I heard sense of belonging and a few other topics where EAB runs deep. Please send me an email. My email address is pgunther@eab.com.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, Suzanne, if you'd like to close us out today, it was certainly a pleasure, and we look forward to your continued partnership with us.
So thank you. I think President Smart, were you going to wrap up, or are you?
Suzanne, why don't you and Sean kind of share any thoughts you have in terms of how this relates to the long range plan? Don't want to put you on the spot, but when I kind of summed up, my comments on number 5, I think that's what I wanted to share with the group. But why don't you and Sean kind of share any thoughts you have in terms of climate as we move forward on the long range plan?
Sure. I'll go first and let Sean follow up. Just as an FYI, I do have the presentation and it will be posted on the long range website that you can find on the Missouri State website under About, and that will take you right to it. When we were working with Angela in advance, we really felt, of course, one of our major themes is campus climate. And so it was important, as we talked with Angela, how do we make this a part of everything that we do for the long range plan, not as a side project, but integrated throughout everything and all parts of it. And I think these 5 points have really given us the opportunity to address those as we're working through the plan. And I think will help us kind of bring a roadmap as we move forward. So Angela, thank you for that. I think it's going to be really helpful because it is an integral part of how we move forward as a university. Sean?
Yeah, thanks, Suzanne, and thank you, Angela. It was great to have a preliminary conversation with you several weeks ago. I just wanted to thank everyone. At this point, we have 150 participants, but I know that we were higher than that. But we really want the long-range plan. This is just one snapshot. These sessions really are, our hope is that this will bring the entire campus community together. Staff Senate, faculty Senate, student engagement. Angela, you just want to reinforce what you said. We're so glad to have Blake as a student member of the committee. But for all of the people who participated today, our entire team, this is a plan of the people. This is a plan of the community. And we really want to raise awareness and seek input from the broad campus community and academic affairs and across the entire community. So I just wanted to thank everybody for participating today, and any suggestions or ideas you have, we'll have continued invitations through these electronic sessions and others as we move forward. But I just really wanted to really promote participation and input as we move forward across all of the topics, because this is an important thing for the entire campus to be supportive of this long-range plan. So thanks everyone for being here today.
Yeah, I think our next 2 sessions are October 22 and 28. We don't have times yet, but as soon as we do, we will put those out. And so again, share with your colleagues, and thanks everyone for participating today. And Angela, thanks for leading our conversation.
Great, it was a pleasure. Everyone take care.
All right, we're done for the day. See you folks.